What if I told you that the father who abandoned you never actually left? What if I told you that everything you believed about being unwanted was a lie, and the truth was hidden in a box of letters your father never had the courage to send? This is the story of Isaiah Thompson, a man who built his entire identity around being fatherless, until the day he discovered that his father's greatest act of love looked exactly like abandonment. Isaiah Thompson was 32 years old when he got the call that would change everything. He was sitting in his office at the Riverside Community Center, reviewing intake files for the youth mentorship program he'd founded, when his phone rang with news that his father had died. The irony wasn't lost on him. Isaiah had spent the last 8 years of his career working exclusively with children who'd been abandoned by their fathers. Kids who came to the center angry, hurt, and convinced they weren't worth staying for. Isaiah understood them in a way that other social workers couldn't, because he'd been exactly where they were. Isaiah's office walls told the story of his mission. Dozens of photos showed him with the kids he'd mentored over the years, at graduation ceremonies, basketball games, college send-offs. Awards and certificates covered one wall: Outstanding Youth Advocate, Community Hero, Mentor of the Year. But the centerpiece of his office was a simple, framed quote: "You don't need a father to become a man. You just need the determination to prove you're stronger than his absence." Isaiah lived by those words. He'd built his entire adult life around the belief that his father's abandonment had actually made him stronger, more compassionate, more determined to succeed. When kids came to him crying about fathers who'd walked away, Isaiah would tell them his story. "My dad left when I was 7, he'd say, his voice steady and confident. "My mom raised me alone, worked 2 jobs, sacrificed everything. I used to think I was broken because he didn't want me. But you know what I learned? His leaving taught me that the only person you can count on is yourself. It taught me that real strength comes from within." The kids would nod, finding hope in Isaiah's success. Here was proof that abandonment didn't have to define you. Here was someone who'd taken the worst thing that ever happened to him and turned it into his greatest strength. Isaiah had given this speech hundreds of times over the years. He believed every word of it. He was also completely wrong. The lawyer's office smelled like old books and disappointment. Isaiah sat across from Mr. Patterson, an elderly attorney who'd been handling his father's affairs, trying to process information that didn't make sense. "I'm sorry," Isaiah said, shaking his head. "There must be some mistake. My father didn't have any assets. He left us with nothing." Mr. Patterson adjusted his glasses and looked at the papers again. "According to my records, Mr. Thompson, your father, Robert Thompson, owned a 3-bedroom house on Elm Street, as well as significant life insurance policies. You're listed as the sole beneficiary." Isaiah felt like he was in someone else's life. "That's impossible. My father abandoned my mother and me when I was 7. We never heard from him again. We struggled financially for years because of him." The lawyer's expression grew puzzled. "Mr. Thompson, I've been handling your father's legal affairs for over 20 years. He never mentioned. Are you certain about these details?" "Of course I'm certain." Isaiah's voice rose higher than he intended. "I lived it. My mother worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. We lost our house when I was 12 because we couldn't make the payments. I wore secondhand clothes and ate free school lunches because my father walked away and never looked back." Mr. Patterson was quiet for a long moment, studying the file. "Mr. Thompson, these records show that your father made monthly payments to someone named Linda Thompson for over 25 years. Would that be your mother?" Isaiah's world tilted. No, that's not possible. She never mentioned any payments. According to these bank records, he never missed a payment. Not once. 3 days later, Isaiah stood in front of 1247 Elm Street, staring at a modest blue house with white trim and a well-maintained garden. The key felt foreign in his hand as he unlocked the front door for the first time. The house was clean, simply furnished, and completely foreign to him. Family photos covered the mantel above the fireplace, but they weren't photos of the family Isaiah remembered. They were photos of him. Isaiah at 7, gap-toothed and grinning in his Little League uniform. Isaiah at his high school graduation, looking serious in his cap and gown. Isaiah at college, then graduate school, then at various community events over the years. Photos that someone had taken from a distance, or somehow obtained copies of. His hands were shaking as he picked up each frame. How had his father gotten these pictures? Why had his father gotten these pictures? In the kitchen, Isaiah found a bulletin board covered with newspaper clippings. Articles about his work at the community center, mentions of his mentorship program, a small piece from the local paper when he'd received his Community Hero Award. Someone had been following his career, collecting evidence of his success. But it was the refrigerator that broke him. Held up by magnets were report cards, his report cards, from elementary school through high school. Report cards his father should never have seen because his father had abandoned them when Isaiah was 7. Isaiah sank into a kitchen chair staring at these impossible artifacts of a life he thought his father had never cared about. Nothing made sense anymore. Isaiah found the room on his third day of searching through the house. It was the back bedroom, the one he'd initially assumed was just storage. But when he opened the door, he realized it wasn't storage at all. It was a shrine. The walls were covered with photos, achievements, and milestone moments from Isaiah's life. His baby pictures, childhood artwork, school photos through the years. His college acceptance letter was framed on the wall next to his graduate degree. There were photos of him that Isaiah didn't even remember being taken. But the most shocking discovery was the corner of the room that looked like a teenager's bedroom. A twin bed with a blue comforter, a desk with school supplies, bookshelves filled with books appropriate for a boy growing up. It was as if his father had maintained a space for him all these years, as if he'd been hoping Isaiah would come home. On the desk was a thick photo album labeled Isaiah, Years 732. Isaiah opened it with trembling hands and found photographs documenting his entire life after his father had supposedly abandoned him. Birthday parties Isaiah didn't remember his father attending, but there he was in the background. School plays, graduation ceremonies, even his college move-in day, his father had been there, watching from a distance, documenting his son's life like a devoted parent. Isaiah collapsed into the desk chair, overwhelmed by the implications of what he was seeing. His father hadn't abandoned him. His father had been watching him, caring about him, celebrating his achievements from afar. But why? Why stay away? Why let Isaiah believe he was unwanted? Why hide this love instead of sharing it? The answer was in the bottom drawer of the desk. The box was simple brown cardboard, about the size of a shoebox with "For Isaiah" written on the top in his father's handwriting. Inside were dozens of letters, all addressed to him, arranged chronologically by date. The earliest was dated just 2 weeks after his father had left. Isaiah picked up the first letter with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. "My dear son, today was the hardest day of my life. I had to watch your mother explain to you that Daddy wasn't coming home, and I had to watch you cry and not be able to comfort you. You asked her if it was because you were bad, and it took everything in me not to run to you and tell you that you are the most perfect little boy in the world. But I can't come to you, Isaiah, because I love you too much." Isaiah read on, his eyes blurring with tears. "The doctors say I have 6 months to live, maybe a year if I'm lucky. The cancer is aggressive and the treatments are going to be brutal. I could stay and put you and your mother through the hell of watching me deteriorate, of seeing you afraid every day that Daddy might not wake up. I could stay and use up every penny we have on medical bills, leaving you both with nothing but debt and traumatic memories. Or I could leave now, while you still remember me as the daddy who played catch with you and read you bedtime stories. I could leave and use my life insurance money to make sure you and your mother never have to worry about money again." Isaiah's chest felt tight, like he couldn't breathe. He reached for the next letter. "Isaiah, you turned 8 today. I watched your party from across the street. You looked so happy, and your mother looked proud of the celebration she'd put together for you. The life insurance money I've been sending her is working. You had a real party, with friends and cake and presents. If I had stayed, if we'd spent everything on my medical care, there wouldn't have been money for parties, or new clothes, or the piano lessons I see you taking now. Leaving you was how I showed you I loved you." Letter after letter revealed the truth Isaiah had never known. His father had been diagnosed with terminal cancer shortly after Isaiah's 7th birthday. Facing a choice between putting his family through the trauma of watching him die slowly while bankrupting them with medical bills, or leaving to ensure they'd be financially secure, he'd chosen to disappear. But he'd never really left. He'd spent the remaining 15 years of his life. The cancer had gone into remission for over a decade, working as a maintenance supervisor and living as simply as possible so he could send every spare dollar to Isaiah and his mother. He'd attended every important event in Isaiah's life from a distance. He'd been proud of every achievement, worried through every challenge, and loved his son every single day. Isaiah, age 16, you made honor roll again. I'm so proud of you. I wanted to tell you myself, but I know that would only confuse and hurt you now. You've built a life without me, and it's a beautiful life. Your mother has done an incredible job raising you. You're becoming the kind of young man I always hoped you'd be. Kind, intelligent, strong. I made the right choice in leaving. You're proof of that. Isaiah, age 22. You graduated college today. I cried watching you walk across that stage. You're the first person in our family to get a college degree. The life insurance money paid for that education, and it was worth every sacrifice. You're going to do amazing things in this world. I love you so much. Isaiah, age 29. I read in the paper about your mentorship program. You're helping kids who don't have fathers, and it breaks my heart that you think you're one of those kids. You've never been fatherless, son. I've been loving you from a distance every day of your life. I hope someday you'll understand why I had to love you this way. The final letter was dated just 6 months earlier. Isaiah, age 32. The cancer is back, and this time there's no fighting it. I'm leaving you the house and everything in it because I want you to know the truth. I want you to understand that every day you felt abandoned, I was actually loving you. Every day you thought you weren't worth staying for, I was proving that you were worth sacrificing for. I'm sorry I never had the courage to tell you this while I was alive. I was afraid you'd hate me for lying to you all these years. But I need you to know, you were never unwanted. You were so wanted that I gave up my chance to be your father so you could have the chance to become the incredible man you are. I love you, son. I have always loved you, Dad. Isaiah spent the next hour in that room, reading every letter, studying every photo, trying to reconcile the father he'd hated with the father who'd loved him enough to disappear. The anger he'd carried for 25 years was transforming into something else. Grief, yes, but also a strange, overwhelming gratitude. His phone rang. It was his mother. Isaiah, how are you handling all of this? I know it must be confusing, finding out about the house. Mom, Isaiah said, his voice hoarse from crying. Did you know? There was a long pause. Know what, honey? About the money, about Dad, about everything. His mother sighed deeply. I wondered when you'd figure it out. Yes, Isaiah, I knew. Why didn't you tell me? Because he made me promise not to. He said that if you knew he was supporting us, you'd want to see him, and he couldn't bear to have you watch him die. He said that if you knew he was still alive and choosing to stay away, it would hurt you more than thinking he just didn't care. Isaiah closed his eyes. I built my entire life around hating him. No, sweetie. You built your entire life around being strong. Your father was right about that. You became an incredible man. His sacrifice worked exactly the way he hoped it would. But I spent years telling kids that their fathers didn't love them enough to stay. I told them that absent fathers were just selfish men who couldn't handle responsibility. And now you know better. Now you know that sometimes fathers leave because they love their children too much to stay. That evening, Isaiah walked through his father's house again. But this time, he wasn't seeing the home of a stranger. He was seeing the home of a man who'd spent 15 years loving his son from a distance, collecting proof of that son's success, maintaining hope for a relationship that could never happen. In the basement, Isaiah found something that stopped him cold. A fully operational youth shelter. The basement had been converted into a safe haven for runaway and homeless teenagers. There were 8 bunk beds, a small kitchen, a study area with computers, and a counseling room. On the wall was a sign, Thompson House, a place for kids who need a family. Isaiah found the files in his father's office upstairs. For the past 10 years, Robert Thompson had been running an unofficial shelter for teenagers in crisis. Kids who'd aged out of foster care, teens who'd been kicked out for being gay, young people fleeing abusive homes. His father had been housing them, feeding them, and helping them get back on their feet. The current residents, 3 teenagers Isaiah found when he came back the next evening, told him about the man they called Mr. T. He never asked questions, said Sarah, a 17-year-old who'd been living there for 6 months. He just said the house was for kids who needed a family and that he understood what it felt like to be separated from the people you love. He talked about his son sometimes, added Kevin, 16, said his son was out there helping kids like us and that he was proud of him. He said maybe someday he'd get to meet him. Isaiah realized that while he'd been helping fatherless children find strength and purpose, his father had been giving actual fatherless children a home and hope. They'd been doing the same work, motivated by the same loss, just from different sides of the story. Standing in that basement shelter, Isaiah finally understood his father's final gift. Robert Thompson hadn't just left him a house. He'd left him a legacy, a mission, a way to transform their shared story of separation into a story of service. 6 months later, Isaiah stood in the backyard of 1247 Elm Street watching teenagers who'd found their way to Thompson House playing basketball and helping with dinner prep. The house was now officially licensed as a transitional housing facility, funded through his father's life insurance money and donations from the community. But Thompson House was different from other shelters. Isaiah had created a unique program that brought together two groups: teenagers who'd lost their fathers and fathers who'd lost contact with their children. Every Tuesday evening, the house hosted father circles, support groups where fathers who'd been separated from their children through divorce, addiction, incarceration, or other circumstances could meet with young people who'd grown up without fathers. It wasn't therapy exactly, and it wasn't replacement relationships. It was something deeper, healing for both sides. Isaiah watched as Tom, a 40-year-old man who hadn't seen his daughter in 3 years due to his past addiction, taught Kevin how to change a car tire. In the kitchen, Sarah was learning to cook for Miguel, a father of two who'd lost custody during his divorce and was fighting to rebuild his relationship with his kids. These kids need to see that men who leave sometimes leave for reasons that have nothing to do with the children being unworthy, Isaiah explained to a reporter who was doing a story on the program. And these fathers need to see that their absence has affected real children, that their choices matter, and that it's never too late to learn how to love better. Isaiah kept his father's letters in his office, and sometimes he'd read excerpts to the teenagers who came to Thompson House convinced they were unwanted. "My father left me when I was 7, he'd tell them, just like he always had. But now the rest of the story was different. I spent 25 years thinking that meant I wasn't worth staying for. But what I learned is that sometimes people leave because they love you so much, they're willing to sacrifice their own happiness for yours. Sometimes the greatest act of love looks exactly like abandonment." That evening, as Isaiah locked up the house and headed home to his own apartment, he passed the spot where his father used to park to watch him from a distance. He stopped there for a moment, pulled out his phone and called his mother. "Mom, I think I finally understand what Dad meant when he said leaving was how he showed he loved me. I'm doing the same thing in reverse, staying here, taking care of these kids. It's how I'm showing him I love him too. He'd be so proud of you, Isaiah. He'd be so proud of the father you've become to all these children." "I'm not their father," Isaiah corrected gently. "I'm just proving that love doesn't always look the way we expect it to. Sometimes it looks like staying. Sometimes it looks like leaving. But it's always, always there." Thank you for joining me for another story here on The Turning Point. Isaiah's journey reminds us that the stories we tell ourselves about why people leave us may not always be the whole truth. Sometimes the greatest acts of love are the ones that look like abandonment. And sometimes the people who seem absent are actually loving us from a distance. Do you have a story about abandonment that you've never questioned? Is there someone in your life whose leaving you've only understood from one perspective? What would change if you discovered that their absence was actually a form of presence, their leaving actually a way of staying? Maybe you're the Isaiah in this story, someone who's built your identity around being unwanted, only to discover that you were actually wanted so much that someone sacrificed their own happiness for yours. Or maybe you're the Robert, someone who's had to make the impossible choice between staying and potentially causing harm, or leaving and definitely causing pain. Here's what I want you to consider. What if the story you've been telling yourself about why someone left isn't the complete story? What if their abandonment wasn't about your worth, but about their love? What if the absence that's defined you was actually someone's greatest act of sacrifice? If Isaiah's story moved you, I'd love to hear about a time when you discovered that someone's actions meant something completely different than you'd originally thought. Or maybe you're still carrying the pain of abandonment and haven't found your way to understanding yet. Leave a comment below and share your story. Your turning point might help someone else rewrite the narrative they've been carrying about their own worth. And if you're ready for another powerful transformation, check out our next video. We drop a new one every week, and next week, we're exploring the story of a woman who discovered that her biggest failure opened the door to her greatest calling. Don't forget to like this video if Isaiah's journey resonated with you, and subscribe for more weekly stories where abandonment becomes understanding, where pain becomes purpose, and where the missing pieces of our stories help us become whole. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a turning point that could change everything. Sometimes the love we've been looking for has been there all along, just in a form we didn't recognize. Your story of abandonment might actually be a story of the deepest kind of love, the love that's willing to disappear so you can flourish. I'll see you in the next video.